Hello, my name is Christopher Renstrom. I'm the creator of rulingplanets.com and Christopher Renstrom Astrology. And this time, I wanted to talk to you about Uranus entering the zodiac sign of Gemini on July 7th. Uranus is perhaps the most unique and eccentric planet in astrology. It's the only planet in our solar system that orbits the sun on its side, rotating like a wheel. In fact, its north and south poles are where the equators are situated on all the other planets. Plus, it also has rings like Saturn. Uranus is the first of the 3 modern planets in astrology. It was discovered in 1781, at the midpoint between the American War for Independence and the French Revolution. That's why it has the reputation for being revolutionary. It also gets its reputation for being revolutionary for having upset the traditional astrological order of the planets. The traditional planets in astrology are the Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. But when Uranus was discovered in 1781, it upset all that. It overthrew the pantheon as we knew it. And that's what made Uranus's entrance into the astrological pantheon so exciting and electric. Now, from the start, the planet had a bit of a naming problem. It was originally named Georgium Sidus, then it was named Herschel, and then it was Uranus, and then there was even talk of renaming it Prometheus. Now, the reason why it was originally named Georgium Sidus, which means George's star, by its discoverer Sir William Herschel, is because Herschel wanted to honor the king who had given him his title. But that didn't go over so well on the continent, as George III had a reputation for being cray-cray, and he was also famous for having lost the North American colonies. The planet was then named after its discoverer, Herschel, and it was referred to as Herschel for many years in both Britain and America. Indeed, the great American astrologer Luke Dennis Broughton, one of the few astrologers to work with the planet on a regular basis within the first 100 years of its discovery, only uses the name Herschel in his Broughton's Monthly Planet Reader and Astrological Journal, which was published in the 1860s here in America. But it was the German astronomer Johann Albert Bode who suggested that the planet be named Uranus, after the Greek god of the sky, Uranus. Bode wanted to maintain the tradition of naming planets after Greek gods, and since Saturn was the father of Jupiter, it only made sense to name the planet after the father of Saturn. Uranus, or Uranus, means starry night. In ancient Greece, Uranus is famously not depicted in human form. Indeed, there are no images or symbols of him in either painting or sculpture, as the idea of gazing upon the stars in the nighttime sky was sufficient enough. You can't really top the vault of heaven when it comes to depicting the majesty of God. But in this case, it is a God who is far removed, separated from this world by time. Now, what is Uranus entering the zodiac sign of Gemini going to do? Well, it's something we all want to know, and I'll be getting into Uranus's impact on each one of the 12 zodiac signs in just a couple of minutes. But what I wanted to share with you before that is that Uranus in Gemini has quite a singular reputation in astrology. It begins with the early 20th century American astrologer John Hazelrig, who was the first to point out in his 1900 book, Metaphysical Astrology, that it was Luke Dennis Broughton, the fellow that I mentioned before, who was the first one to write about Uranus, or as Broughton would say, Herschel, in Gemini, and particularly its transit over the 9th degree of Gemini, and how it was connected to war and upheaval in the history of the United States. Indeed, Hazelrig was so convinced that Broughton was onto something with his prediction of Uranus in Gemini and its special relationship to the 9th degree of Gemini, that Hazelrig went ahead and predicted that in 1942, America would also experience war and social upheaval. Now, I would like to share with you an excerpt from the winter quarter of 1861 issue of Broughton's Monthly Planet Reader and Astrological Journal, where he talks about Uranus transiting the zodiac sign of Gemini. When Herschel entered the sign of Gemini for good in the spring of 1775, the American Revolution broke out. And on the 4th of July, 1776, when the Americans declared their independence, the planet Herschel was 9 degrees in Gemini. And in the spring of 1792, the planet Herschel got out of Gemini for good and entered into Cancer. And in Hale's History of the United States, we find this passage. Early in the spring of 1782, Pacific overtures were accordingly made to the American government, and both nations desisted from hostile measures. Broughton goes on to say, it takes about 84 years for Herschel to perform one revolution round the heavens, and that planet entered Gemini again for good in April 1859. And in November 1859, the Harper's Ferry affair broke out. When Herschel was 7 degrees in Gemini, within 2 degrees of the same place that he was in when the Declaration of Independence was made, and on the 20th of December, 1860, when South Carolina declared her independence, the planet Herschel was just in the very same degree that it was in when the United States of America declared their independence. The Union has just lasted one revolution of the planet Herschel round the heavens, and until Herschel gets out of Gemini, which will not be before July 1865, we do not look for any peace for this country. So, how did Broughton do? Well, Uranus entered Gemini on April 8, 1775, and the Battle of Lexington and Concord, which began the American War of Independence, took place on April 19, 1775. On July 4, 1776, Uranus was, as he said, at 9 degrees Gemini. Actually, it was 8 degrees 55 minutes to be exact, but we can round up to make it 9 degrees Gemini. And in the spring of 1782, peace negotiations between Great Britain and the newly formed United States commenced in Paris. But what's interesting is that the Treaty of Paris, which officially ends the War for Independence, was signed in September 1783, when Uranus was at 11 degrees Cancer, conjunct the United States of America's Sun at 13 degrees Cancer. Now let's move on to what he has to say about the Civil War. John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry was pivotal in the lead-up to the American Civil War. It was an effort led by the abolitionist John Brown to start a slave rebellion in the South, and he was really quite ambitious. He seized explosives and ammunition and was planning a full-out rebellion that the slaves would follow him in. Now, he was regarded by some as a great martyr to the cause, and he was regarded by others as a terrorist because of his savage hacking to pieces of 5 pro-slavery men in Kansas and the wounding of several more. John Brown was eventually captured by U.S. Marines who had been sent in to quell the rebellion, and it's interesting to note that the leader of the Marines at that time was Lieutenant Colonel Robert E. Lee, the same Robert E. Lee who would go on to lead the Confederate Army against the Union. Brown was tried and convicted of treason against the state of Virginia and executed in December 1859. Broughton was right. Uranus was at 9 degrees Gemini on December 20th, 1860, when South Carolina seceded from the Union. But what's interesting is that Uranus was retrograde at the time. It's something to keep in mind because Broughton went to press probably around November or December of 1860. What he didn't anticipate was that Uranus comes out of retrograde in February 1861, after he had gone to press with his magazine, and it passed over 9 degrees Gemini for the final time on April 3rd, 1861. April 3rd, 1861. That is 9 days before the Confederate troops fired on Fort Sumter in South Carolina's Charleston Harbor, resulting in the Union Army surrender, which then began the American Civil War. So, was Broughton right in his prediction that the Civil War would end in July 1865? We all know that General Lee surrendered to General Grant at Appomattox on April 9, 1865, but it wasn't until June 23, 1865, that the last of the Confederate forces surrendered. Now, Hazelrig, the early 20th century American astrologer who first brought Broughton to our attention in his book Metaphysical Astrology, published in 1900, says that Uranus will enter Gemini again in the year 1942. However, if you consult an ephemeris, Uranus actually entered the zodiac sign of Gemini on August 8, 1941. And on December 7, 1941, the Japanese military bombed Pearl Harbor, a U.S. naval base on Oahu Island, Hawaii. And this surprise attack is responsible for having brought the United States of America into World War II. And then again, when you consult an ephemeris, you'll see that Uranus first passed the 9th degree of Gemini on June 1st, 1944. June 1st, 1944. That's 5 days before D-Day, when Allied forces launched the largest seaborne invasion in history on Normandy, France. America played a crucial role in this military campaign that cost 10,000 lives and liberated Western Europe from Nazi Germany. And on June 10, 1949, Uranus finally leaves the zodiac sign of Gemini and enters the zodiac sign of Cancer. June 10th, 1949. That's 2 months after the creation of NATO. NATO stands for the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and it was created by 12 countries from Europe and North America on April 4th, 1949, to provide collective security against the Soviet Union. So, what can we expect with Uranus entering Gemini on July 7th? Well, one idea is that according to foreignaffairs.com, a magazine of U.S. foreign policy and international allies founded in 1922, quote, Pax Americana, often identified with the long peace, is gone. Born with the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, the U.S.-led international rules-based order is no longer led by the United States of America. The United States no longer works as it once did with its NATO allies. Now, whether it's abandoned those allegiances altogether is not altogether clear, and as anyone can see, the division in this country between the left and the right hasn't been this dramatic in decades. It's clear that Uranus, the planet of revolution and change, is connected to major turning points in the history of the United States of America. Uranus was in Gemini when we declared our independence from Britain, Uranus was in Gemini when we fought a civil war, and Uranus was in Gemini when we became a true world power. Now, what comes next remains to be seen when Uranus enters Gemini on July 7th, 2025. Remember that it retrogrades back down out of Gemini on November 7th of this year, only to re-enter Gemini again on April 25th, 26. It also remains to be seen what happens when Uranus passes over 9 degrees Gemini, and it will pass over 9 degrees Gemini on July 29th, 2027, November 4th, 2027, and finally on May 13th, 2028. And then it remains to be seen what will happen when Uranus leaves Gemini and enters Cancer on August 3rd, 2032, and then finally again on May 22nd, 2033. Well, I don't know about you, but that's a lot to absorb. But let's remember that each of these Uranus transits in the zodiac sign of Gemini ushered in a new age. And although what I've described is clearly larger-than-life events, those larger-than-life events are made up by the lives lived by people like you and me. They say that the stars incline, they do not compel. And what that means is that we live in a universe of choice. And how we want to direct the energy of a planet like Uranus is up to each and every one of us. If you're born under Aries, or you have Aries rising, what you're going to notice when Uranus, the planet of revolution and change, enters the zodiac sign of Gemini is that the rules of the game are changing. This can be in reference to the rules of the game at work, the rules of the game in your lifestyle, even the rules of the game in your neighborhood. Now, this is something that sounds very exciting and very stimulating, but as an Aries, you're a little bit mixed about that. And that's because Aries is ruled by the planet Mars. Mars was named after the Roman god of war. And what this means is that there's a kind of soldierly aspect to people born under Aries or who have Aries rising. And what I mean by that is that you want to know what the rules are, just like you want to know what the target is and what the format is. These are things that you follow. These are things that you obey. And the reason that you follow these rules or this format is because it allows you to reach your target. You know, if you take aim at a target, you expect to hit the mark. You expect to reach the target. And that's best done after discipline and practice and knowing how to handle yourself in any situation. When the rules of the game are changing, then that means the target changes, okay? Now, you are a fire sign, which means that you are very intuitive, and it means that you live in the moment, so you can deal with that, but you want to know that you can accomplish your ends again and again and again and again. That's why Aries really looks to hierarchy, it looks to structure, it looks to format, to lead the way. With Uranus moving into Gemini, it is, as I said, the planet of revolution and change, but because Gemini is an air sign and Aries is a fire sign, that means that there's a natural sextile that exists between your two signs. Sextiles in astrology represent a conversation. One sign is talking to the other sign. So where Aries is driven towards a single purpose goal, Gemini likes options. It's like we could do this or we could do that. We could approach it in this way or we could approach it in that way. And that's what I mean by the rules of the game are changing. So what you're going to be doing, Aries, during this period of time that Uranus is traveling through Gemini, is that it's going to inspire you to invent. It's going to inspire you to improvise. It's going to inspire you to think on your feet, all right? And it's something that you might, as I said before, be a little hesitant to do at first, but the more you do it and the more you get into the swing of it, you're going to find that you're a lot better at improvising than you ever thought you were before. You'll also discover that you're a lot cleverer than you ever gave yourself credit for before. And that will be a unique benefit of Uranus and Gemini forming a sextile to your sign. If you're born under Taurus or you have Taurus rising, you may have two reactions to Uranus leaving your zodiac sign on July 7th. The first reaction might be an enormous sigh of relief as you fall to the ground and kiss the earth and say, thank heavens, I'm back on terra firma. And that's because as a Taurus or Taurus rising, you have had Uranus, the planet of revolution and change, spinning through your zodiac sign for the last 7 years. Uranus is most powerful when it enters a sign and most powerful when it leaves. So when it first entered your sign, which is around May 2018, you might have experienced a lot of the tumult and upset, and in the past few weeks, you might have also experienced some surprise revelations and some tumult and some upset as well. That's Uranus bringing things to a close and saying, don't forget about me. All right, so Uranus has entered the zodiac sign of Gemini on July 7th of 2025. So what that means is that it's done all the damage it's going to do to you. But has it done damage, really. Yes, it flipped your world upside down and inside out. That's what Uranus does when it goes through a zodiac sign. And yes, that would have been particularly excruciating for you because you're a Taurus, that's an earth sign and a fixed sign, and you don't like things being flipped upside down or turned inside out. But at the same time, and maybe in a sort of like quiet way, you might have kind of gotten into Uranus's energy as it coursed through your zodiac sign. I mean, there's no way that you can close your eyes and hold your breath for 7 years. You're going to have to deal with Uranus moving through your sign, and you're going to have to deal with the repercussions of all that. So you might find yourself in a very different place than you were back in 2018. Or you might find yourself back at the beginning again. Uranus is often compared to a wheel that spins around and comes back to where it began again. But even if you find yourself back where you began, you've changed as a person and you're very different. So here are all these experiences that you've gone through, all of these sudden ups and downs and changes, all these rules being broken and the goalposts being moved from one end of the gridiron to the next. Well, what do you have to show for all of this? What you probably have to show for it is basically, I survived. Okay, maybe that's a t-shirt you can have made up. And I survived Uranus in my zodiac sign, and I'm here to tell you about it. Uranus has changed your ideas of what it's like to be a Taurus. Okay, so it's changed your ideas about being fixed. It's changed your ideas about being results-oriented. It's changed your life plan during this period of time. And so now that you're on the threshold of a new sign, or Uranus, rather, is on the threshold of a new sign, you're faced with a decision. Do I go back to what I know? Do I rebuild and start again my life? Or do I move forward with the things that I have learned? And by moving forward with the things that you've learned, moving forward with how your skills have been honed, how your talents have been enhanced, how your way of looking at things has been sharpened. It's been questioned and upset, but it's also been sharpened and it's also been brought into high focus. You yourself have experienced things that you never thought you would ever experience, and you yourself may be quite impressed with how well you did. Moreover, there's going to be changes in money for you and the way that you make it and the way that you think about money. This could reference different ways of making money or what you do for a living or something along those lines, just as much as it could reference the way that you invest your money or that you save your money or your attitude about financial solvency. Maybe you learned that you were too restrictive or too conservative, or maybe you learned that you weren't restrictive enough or conservative enough. There's a lot that experience has informed you. But the great feeling that you're going to have is that you are no longer penned in. You are no longer in this spot, in this role, in this fixed place of responsibility, that you're really free to go and do whatever it is that you want to do. And that's something that's worth pondering. That's something that's worth really thinking about. Now remember, Uranus retrogrades out of Gemini and returns to Taurus in early November. It's November 7th. And so you'll get a sort of chance to try out new ideas and then revisit the way that you did them before. This to me is one of the wonderful things about modern planets. They take so long to move through an astrological sign, and they often will enter a sign, retrograde back out of it, and enter again. And so it really gives you a sense of really dipping your toe in the pool and getting a sense of how things are going to be different and how you're reacting to things being very differently. Now, I want to assure you that when Uranus retrogrades back down into your sign on November 7th, that doesn't mean a return of the craziness, all right? It allows you to sort of go back and check in with yourself about what you feel about these new changes and how they're doing. Okay, I've got a good image here for you. Let's talk about a diet, all right? Let's say that you go on a diet and you lose all this weight and you buy all these new clothes. Okay, that's Uranus going into Gemini, all right. It then retrogrades back down into Taurus on November 7th. And that's kind of you going back to your closet and checking out the old clothes again. The old clothes that you wore when you were heavier. The old clothes that you kept in storage just in case you gained all that weight again. And let's say you're feeling like, I am keeping the weight off this time. Like this is a wonderful thing. Like, I think this is something here to stay. That kind of going back through your closet and asking, do I need to hold on to these old clothes or not? That's really what Uranus is doing in Taurus from November to April 25th of next year. You may feel like you might have to keep a couple of pieces of clothing, but I think you're going to feel more like, okay, this is the new me, and I'm comfortable with where I am and where my body is, and I really do want to proceed forward. And that's the sort of energy that I'm talking about, that confidence in proceeding forward that will be with you when Uranus leaves your sign again and enters Gemini on April 25th, 2026. If you're born under Gemini, or you have Gemini rising, Uranus entering your zodiac sign on July 7th is going to be absolutely electric and electrifying. Now, you've had a lot of activity in your corner of the sky recently. I mean, you just had Jupiter, the planet of good fortune and higher purpose, travel through your zodiac sign. And so Jupiter would have brought with it good things, but also it would have brought with it a test of faith. The idea of belief is very powerful when we're talking about the planet Jupiter. And Jupiter will challenge you in terms of your beliefs and what your relationship is to belief. Jupiter has brought a lot of changes, and Jupiter has brought a lot of fulfillment, and Jupiter has brought a lot of realizations into your life over the past year. Now Jupiter is being followed by Uranus. And what's interesting is that Jupiter is being followed by another sky god. Jupiter is the lord of Mount Olympus. He's the lord of the Greek pantheon in ancient Greece, and he was famous for his thunderbolt and ruling from the heaven. But the sky that Jupiter ruled over was the sky that you saw in the day, blue sky, the sky that lit up things so that you could see for miles and miles and miles, and you could find your way around the day. Sky that was associated to weather. Maybe you had clear skies, maybe you had stormy skies, and Jupiter was the god of storms in Greek mythology. That's the kind of sky that Jupiter rules over. Uranus's association to the sky is the starry night. Okay, when the sun goes down, you can see all the constellations and all the stars in the sky. So Uranus's sky is the sky that's beyond the sky that we see in our everyday life, which is the sky of Jupiter. So what that translates to in your life is you've gone through this period of seeing things that you believed in either come together wonderfully or fall apart, and then you renewed your belief in something else. You've gone through this period of fulfillment, and there should be this general sense of having achieved or accomplished things. Now with Uranus going through your sign, it's going to feel like you've caught a tiger by the tail. Okay, what happens after you accomplish that achievement? And so with Uranus passing through your zodiac sign, it basically is going to get very crazy. Why is it going to get crazy? Uranus isn't a unifying planet like Jupiter is. Jupiter takes all the disparate parts of things and weaves it together into a tapestry where it's integrated, where it's holistic, where we understand how it works. The scope of Uranus is so vast that it's beyond our scope to really follow. It's beyond our scope to really understand. And so what happens here is that you're going to experience what it's like to be on top of the world, which is what perhaps Jupiter has brought into your life. And remember that Uranus is the planet of revolution and change. I like to liken it a lot to the Wheel of Fortune. It's a continually spinning wheel. What's on top one day can be on the bottom the next, and what's on the bottom one day can rise to the top. This is something you're going to experience with a kind of cyclonic fury now that Uranus is in your zodiac sign. So Uranus is kind of like a wild horse, and you're a rodeo cowboy on top of it. It's going to be bucking, it's going to be jumping, leaping, it's going to be trying to throw you off. So Uranus is most powerful when it enters a zodiac sign, and then again when it leaves it. So this feeling of Uranus, this wheel of fortune of Uranus, what's on top one day is on the bottom the next, what's on the bottom one day is on top the next. This is going to be very difficult at first to get your bearings. Uranus, when I use the word cyclonic, is cyclonic. I mean, when it comes into your life, it kicks over the game board and it sends all the pieces flying. Now, for a sign like Taurus, which, by the way, if you know any people who are born under Taurus or who have Taurus rising in your life, this would probably be a good time to ask them what it was like to have Uranus in their sign. But also remember that Taurus is an earth sign. It's a fixed sign. It likes things to stay in place, all right? You're Gemini. You're an air sign. You're a mutable sign. You're ruled by Mercury. You like your options. You like your choices. So even though Uranus may seem like a crazy whirlwind that's coming into your life, at the same time, you sort of might be like a surfer. And so as a Gemini, you're going to want to ride that energy that comes on in. Will it be maybe overwhelming at first? Perhaps. But that doesn't mean that you won't get the hang of it eventually. Remember that Uranus is in your zodiac sign for 7 years. But remember that this is going to be very thrilling. It's going to be very electrifying. You're going to like all the things that are happening. You're going to be petrified at times at all the things that are happening. You may even wonder whether you can keep up or whether you can ride this wave or ride this wild bucking bronco. But you're a Gemini. You learn as you go along. So at first it may be overwhelming. It may sort of like blow you out of the water. It may be more than you anticipated. But don't stop there. It's in your zodiac sign. So Uranus is also bringing up all of those talents and skills, aptitudes and abilities that you have as a Gemini. It's going to be electrifying your mind. It's going to allow you to race quickly through all the options. And it's going to make you a quicker study than you've ever been before. Now, Uranus will be in Gemini for 7 years, but on November 7th, it will retrograde out of Gemini back into Taurus, where it will be in Taurus until about April 25th of next year, and it re-enters your sign. That's going to give you a pause. That's going to give you an opportunity to catch your breath, to be like, whoo, that was wild and crazy. But it's also going to give you an ability to sort of strategize and plan what your next moves are going to be. There are great revolutions and changes taking place, but remember, this is in the first few months of Uranus in Gemini. After maybe about the first 8 months or a year, it settles down, becomes much more manageable. But during this period of time, enjoy everything that's showing up. Look at the things that are being knocked over and sent flying in all kinds of directions, and work with the energy. And as long as you stay in the moment and work with this energy, this is not only going to be a very exciting and wild roller coaster ride, but it's going to take you places that you never thought that you would ever get to before. Now, if you're born under Cancer or you have Cancer rising, what I've described about Uranus might sound really intimidating to you, if not altogether frightening. As a Cancer, you like to feel your way through things. You're very cyclical in nature. That's the nature of your ruling planet. The moon is to travel through all its phases consistently. The moon may change its appearance in the sky, but it does it in a consistent way, where it waxes and gains light, it becomes full, it begins to wane, lose its light, it grows dark, only to reemerge and wax and gain light again. This idea of revolution and change, of things being pulled up by their roots and thrown up in the air, anything disrupting your ritual, your schedule, the way that you go through your day, all of that can be regarded as being very disconcerting. But I want to remind you of something. Your ruling planet is the moon, and as I said, it's cyclical in nature. It goes through all of its phases in a consistent way. Even though Uranus's reputation is a reputation of unpredictability, of uncertainty, and of change, of even perhaps an irreverence towards the past or towards roots or things that are traditional, Uranus in its own way is cyclical by nature. Think of the word revolution for a moment. Revolution and change. These are the hallmark signature words that we use to describe Uranus. And when we think of revolution, we think of a revolt, of throwing over the established order in order to create something new and radically different, with the expectation that it's going to be an improvement on what came before. But that wasn't the original meaning of the word revolution. The original meaning of revolution was connected to the orbit of a planet. When a planet orbits the sun, it goes around the sun and it comes back to the place where it originally began, like the turning of a wheel, which is an image that I often like to use with Uranus because it orbits the sun on its side, just like a wheel in the sky. Keeps on turning. That's how it appears. With the word revolution, which is completing one orbit around the sun and coming back to where it began, that's cyclical in nature. In other words, every planet, Uranus included, will orbit the sun and come back to where it began. That's how we were able to figure out how long it took a planet to go around the sun, what planets were closer to the sun and what planets were further away. This idea of going full circle is something that you as a Cancer, with your ruling planet, the moon, can understand. This is something that is not foreign or difficult for you to wrap your mind around. And so if you can get into this idea that the Uranian cycle, although the planet's characteristics may work differently than yours, upsets, it revolutionizes, it turns things on its head, a lot of times with Uranus, things can be turned on their head or they can be upset only to be taken off their head and set right again, or if they're upset, to be restored or revived. It's rare when revolutions take place and they wipe out everything that came before and you begin a whole new life. I mean, they tried to do that in the French Revolution, even went and tried to create a new calendar, but eventually things came back and the society that was rebelled against gradually reaffirmed its hold and took its place again. Now, that didn't disqualify everything that happened during the French Revolution, but it testified to the cycle of time. What you may experience during the 7-year period that Uranus is traveling through Gemini, you may experience this full turn of the wheel that's taking place. You may, for instance, experience the return of people into your life. Remember, Uranus is most powerful when it enters a sign and then again when it exits a sign. And that usually runs about 8 months to a year of its tenure in a zodiac sign. So over the next few months, you may experience a return of people that you knew into your life, but not as a visit, but as mainstays again, as people that you talk to and see every day. This could be friends. This could be loved ones. This could be people that you worked with who are now in a different context. Maybe they're employing you, or maybe you're employing them in some regard. So there's a familiarity, but things are different. So that could be taking place. There could also be a return to places where you've lived before or you've been before. And that might be something that also sort of shows up in your life. But that doesn't mean you're the same person. That doesn't mean you've reverted to who you were at the age of 7 or 21. You're seeing it from your present place. And these things are being set up in such a way as to really kind of bring about that sense of being in a cycle, of reaffirming that energy in your life, so that as you make adjustments, all right, with Uranus moving through the zodiac sign of Gemini, I don't think it's going to have the impact on you, for instance, that Pluto and Capricorn did from 2008 to recently. Uranus in Gemini is going to be a little more difficult to grasp because Gemini isn't a water sign and it's not an earth sign, so it doesn't trine you and it doesn't sextile with you. But Gemini is still a sign that you know by proximity. It's the sign that's next to yours. So the changes that it's going to be bringing about are going to feel more, like nudges or maybe even taking place in your blind spot. But if you're open to that idea of change and trusting that there is a plan to all of this, because Uranus is very much a planet that's involved with a higher plan, if you can trust that there's a higher plan to all of this, then I think you're actually going to find this period of time of Uranus being in Gemini not only illuminating, but a wonderful prelude to when Uranus enters your zodiac sign in 7 years. If you're born under Leo or you have Leo rising, Uranus in Gemini is going to act as an accelerant. Okay? In other words, it's going to take whatever idea or aspiration or aim that you have, and it's going to accelerate it very quickly. Now, this is something that's exciting and even stimulating, but at the same time, Leo is still a fixed sign, which means you like to take things at your own pace. You don't like to rush for anyone else's pace. You like to move at your own pace towards the things that you want. Now, what's happening here is that Uranus is in the zodiac sign of Gemini, and Gemini is an air sign which forms a sextile to Leo, which is a fire sign. So with Gemini forming a natural sextile to your zodiac sign of Leo, Uranus takes on a more supportive, friendly, constructive energy. Instead of being the planet of revolution, Uranus is going to be more the planet of revelation. Okay, it's going to reveal things to you that you need to know in order to move forward in your life. Now, it's building up on other energies that have already taken place. For instance, Jupiter having been in Gemini recently. Jupiter was in a very strong aspirational place for you, a very strong fulfilling place for you. And so that year that Jupiter was in Gemini, which was June of last year to June of this year, should have been a good year for you, one that you might have found very fulfilling, or where the choices you were making were benefiting you in some way, you were making headway with them. And now that Jupiter is left and Uranus has taken over, Uranus is going to take what was, that was nice that was happening, and it's going to push the pedal to the metal. It's going to accelerate all of these things. So you may find that people of influence play a very powerful role right now. This followed on the heels of the Jupiter and Gemini, but that things are accelerated. Not only are they introducing you to people who can introduce you to people who can help make a vision or an aspiration of yours a reality, but you're being put into the driver's seat right away and immediately. Now, maybe what you've wanted was to be top of the heap. Maybe what you wanted was to be free of a responsibility or an obligation. Maybe what you wanted was a more fulfilling experience of living your life. You're going to find yourself almost hurtling at that, okay? That you're racing towards it and that you're on the road to getting what you wanted all along. But what you're going to discover during this period of time, or a question that might arise in your mind during this period of time, is the question, is striving better than arriving? In other words, did you like the period more where you had to prove yourself, or you had to pay your dues, or you lived a life of practicing things, and now that you're suddenly in a place of accomplishment or a place of fulfillment, or you're speeding towards that, do you find yourself wondering if this is what you really want, or whether you liked things better the previous way? Fire signs like to project into the future. And as a Leo, you're going to be comfortable with the idea of like, okay, I've reached the top. But are you going to be ready with what reaching the top entails? The responsibilities, the obligations, and the challenges. The other thing that I want you to keep in mind as Uranus is in the zodiac sign of Gemini, Gemini is the zodiac sign of the twin. So what you're going to see during this period of time, especially with people who become influential in your life, what you're going to see during this period of time is that people are like a mirror to you. Now, that doesn't mean, people are like a mirror and you're like, oh, let me look at myself. It doesn't mean that. People are like a mirror to you in that they're going to be mirroring different aspects of yourself. You may see some people as being very benevolent, and you may see some people as being very ambitious and driven, and you may see some people as very relaxed in a way that you used to be and you long for, or you may see people who've been transformed by their ambitions into machines, and this is what they're after, and you may find yourself like not liking that aspect of yourself. So remember that Uranus and Gemini sextiles Leo. So this is about conversation. This is about meeting people and having conversation with them. So you're learning about yourself as the planet Uranus is moving through Gemini. Uranus and Gemini is also going to introduce very curious mouthpieces into your life. So listen attentively and converse mindfully with the people who are coming into your life during this period of time. They may seem very different from you, but they're not all that different. And basically, I guess what I'm really trying to say to you is that if you treat each person who's coming into your life during this period of time that Uranus is in Gemini as holding a truth for you, not the truth, but a truth for you that you can engage in and that you can learn from, you're going to find this to be not only a fulfilling, but also a remarkably profound and enlightening experience. If you're born under Virgo, or you have Virgo rising, Uranus entering the zodiac sign of Gemini on July 7th is going to be a bit disorienting for you. Now, you might say, well, Christopher, it's going to be disorienting for me because Uranus is the planet of revolution and change, right? It brings about all sorts of unexpected things. And I would say, yes, that's absolutely true. But the big shift in energy that's going on here has to do with the fact that for the last 7 years, Uranus has been traveling through the zodiac sign of Taurus, which is an earth sign, just like you, Virgo. Your sign is an earth sign. And so for the last 7 years, Uranus has been forming a trining relationship to you. A trine is a harmonious, benevolent aspect that exists between two zodiac signs that share the same element. In this case, Taurus is an earth sign, Virgo is an earth sign. So Uranus, when it was in Taurus, was trining your sign. That means it was showing its more benevolent, more supportive side. If there were revolutions and changes and upsets and things like that, these were things that you could quickly adjust or work out or adapt with what was going on because the energy was trining. These sudden changes in direction or turnabouts might have brought revelations that you were able to use right away, that they didn't really throw you off your stride too much, but that they allowed you to move forward in your life, that essentially the Uranian energy was trining or supportive. Now that it's moving into Gemini, it's going to form a square to your sign, which is Virgo. And a square is a combative energy that exists between two signs that are 90 degrees away from each other on the zodiacal wheel. So square, the nature of a square is Mars. So there's a lot of competition, there's a lot of fight, there's a lot of one-upmanship with this idea. And what goes on when you have a planet like Uranus squaring your sign, which it's going to be doing, is that it's going to be debunking or trying to debunk everything that you've learned about yourself. Okay, for the past 7 years, it's been trining, so you've built up stamina, you've gained knowledge, you've accrued experience, and now that it moves into a squaring aspect, it's going to challenge that. And you may feel like, whoa, what's going on here? I thought we were friends. Okay, and then all of a sudden, there's this kind of animosity that's going on here. Now, I'm not saying that it's animosity that's going to be going on here. What I'm saying is that you're going to experience Uranus more as those wild curveballs being thrown at you from out of left field, which Uranus is so famous for. And before, where you were really quick on your feet and thinking fast, now they may be like really, spinning by very closely or hey, you almost hit me with that wild curveball. It's almost a feeling like Uranus is aiming at you directly, and with this curveball. And so this is going to force you to do more than adapt. This is going to force you to sort of re-scramble or rework where you are in your life. Now, the big area of life that this could be taking place is dealing with your solar 10th house. And the 10th house is associated to career, and it's associated to status, and it's associated to accomplishment and achievement. And so you might have recently gotten to a place of accomplishment or achievement. You might have recently gotten to a place where everything feels very solid or very grounded, where you can sort of maybe even look at your bank account without flinching. But Uranus here is going to move the goalposts. All right. So what you thought was your goal or your target is now been moved. All right. And so being a Virgo and being a practical earth sign, your first reaction is to go and move those goalposts back. Okay, like someone goes and moves the goalposts, you go and say, oh, that's a really great idea. Let's take it under consideration. I really value your input as you move these goalposts back. But what's going to dawn on you with Uranus entering Gemini, and remember, it's most powerful when it enters a sign, so that's going to be the first 8 months, maybe year of Uranus in Gemini, is that you can't move the goalposts back. You can't put the genie back in the bottle. You can't go back to the way that things were done before. And so this can either leave you paralyzed at the crossroads of not knowing what comes next. You want to go back the way you came, but that's not going to happen. Or you can choose to work with what you have. Now, being born under Virgo or having Virgo rising, you're always going to work with what you have. Virgo is one of the most resourceful signs of the zodiac. And given your resourcefulness and your resilience, you'll figure out a way to make this your own. So when I use that phrase, you'll figure out a way to make this your own, to work with the Uranian energy and make it your own. I'm talking about a learning curve here. So you're going to need some time to feel thwarted, and you need time to sort of get the lay of the land, to get an understanding of what the new rules are going to be, and that it's not about preserving or going back, but that it's about moving forward, and that perhaps in seeing the goalposts moved or your world, turned upside down and inside out, this actually gives you a lot of freedom to do things that you weren't able to do before. I mean, it will make you more inventive and spontaneous, which are qualities that you come by naturally because Mercury, the planet of the mind, is your ruling planet. But you're going to have to be really open-minded, more open-minded than you were before, okay? Because you really are getting a lot of new things thrown at you. And the first reaction might be, memories of you at dodgeball when you were a kid, like as the balls are being hurled at you. But if you get a sense of what's going on here, you're actually going to be accessing a different set of mental muscles than you've used. And you may be using new skills or learning new skills or using talents and abilities in completely innovative and different ways. And that's what I want you to focus on. It's what I want you to be open to. As an earth sign, sometimes we get ahead of ourselves. We say, okay, this is what I have to do to get from here to there. During this period of time that Uranus is in Gemini, when it's changing the rules constantly, it's going to be changing the way that you look at things. And that's where your innovation is going to be coming from. And the more open and limber you are in taking on this energy, the more excited and the more engaged and the more proud of yourself that you're going to be. If you're born under Libra or you have Libra rising, The experience of Uranus traveling through the zodiac sign of Gemini is going to be illuminating. Now, Uranus, like the other two modern planets, Neptune and Pluto, when they're traveling through your own sign, they have a tendency to be very overwhelming. And that's because there's no proximity to the energy. It's hard to integrate it right away. When the modern planet first enters a sign, that's when it's most powerful. Actually, it's also at its most powerful when it's leaving a sign. But when it enters a sign, it can be sort of overwhelming. That's why, for instance, Uranus in Gemini, that can be a little bit shocking because Uranus is the planet of revolution and change, sudden revelation and sudden reversals. And so it can be sort of hard to take in when it enters your own sign. And in this case, it's entering the zodiac sign of Gemini. But you're a Libra, which means that you're an air sign, just like Gemini is an air sign. And so where Gemini might be experiencing more sort of like zaps and shocks with Uranus going through its zodiac sign, for you, you're experiencing Uranus in Gemini as an electrical current. Okay, so it's flowing through your zodiac sign. And that's because you are joined to Gemini through a trine. A trine is a benevolent and wonderful relationship that exists between two zodiac signs that share the same element. Gemini is an air sign, Libra is an air sign. And so Uranus takes on a much more constructive and benevolent aspect towards you because of its trine relationship. So what is this going to be impacting in your life? Well, you're going to feel more galvanized to begin with. You'll feel much more energized. You'll feel much more sure of yourself. Don't volunteer explaining what you're feeling to anyone because you're going to have a hard time explaining it. It's really more of a sensation feeling that you have. You feel very electric, and you feel very galvanized. You feel very sure of yourself, but it's in a way that you may be hesitant to talk about because that might kind of like mess it up or not depict accurately what you're feeling inside. But your mind is going to be feeling very illuminated during this period of time. And that's a wonderful thing. Air is associated to relationship and to communication. Certainly when you bring in Gemini, which is the zodiac sign that Uranus is moving through, but air also rules over the mind. So with Uranus moving through Gemini, you're going to find yourself really embracing a new philosophy, a new outlook on life. Now, this might come to you through some sort of spiritual path. This might come to you through some sort of philosophical experience. But there's going to be this feeling that you're rounding a corner, and there's going to be this sense that life makes sense in a new and different way. Now, it's not going to be new and different being completely divorced from your previous experience. We're talking about a trine here. So it's going to be very organic to your previous experience. It's going to evolve naturally out of your previous experience. But there's going to be this feeling that things are finally making sense, that they're not so incongruous, they're not so at odds with one another. Now, remember that Uranus is going to spend 7 years in the zodiac sign of Gemini, and that's actually a really wonderful thing because that gives you 7 years to experience this unfolding. But at first, it's a good idea to remember that you're in the beginning stages. You may get a little fervent, or you might get overly excited, or something like that. This is the way I'm going to live my life from now on, type of thing. You've discovered the answer. But don't be so quick to rush towards that. You have 7 years to get used to this new outlook, this new perspective, this new philosophy. The other thing that you're going to want to keep in mind as this energy unfolds into your life is that there will be many twists and turns in your journey. And that's because Uranus is a planet that's very much associated with sudden twists and turns and about faces, sudden ups and downs and in and outs. And that's basically what makes Uranus Uranus, is that unpredictability. But the unpredictability isn't to catch you by surprise or to interrupt your progress. The unpredictability really testifies to the scope that things are unfolding in your life. As a person, your scope is here. You're looking at things through the margins of a human perspective or a human outlook. Uranus, because it's associated with a realm, the realm of the heavens, the realm of the stars, it's so large and it's so vast. It's so beyond the directions of north, east, west, and south that it can be a little heady and it can be a little discombobulated. What you're going to learn to trust in is that there's a flight plan when Uranus is involved. Jupiter, for instance, is the planet of higher purpose, and Uranus is very much the planet of the higher plan, but it's one that we learn through sudden revelations or epiphanies or aha moments when the light bulb goes off over our head. It's not something that is predictable. It's not something that is mapped out. It's only when we understand a revelation or witness an epiphany that we see how it's all mapped out. So always think of the starry night when you think of Uranus. That's what the Greek word means, Uranus, starry night, father sky. And when you look at the stars, think of the stars as dots that you connect. Those dots can be connected in a variety of different ways. The way that we connected the dots to make the constellations that we know here, for instance, in the West, is not the way that the dots were connected among the stars in the East. Okay, so there are different perspectives, there are different views, there are different ways of looking at things. But what everyone shares in common is connecting the dots, to form constellations. And that would be my way of sharing with you what the next 7 years will be about. Give yourself the patience to connect those dots in the ways that you want to, and maybe reinvent or rework those connections, and let this revelation of a new way of living and a new way of looking at life, let this revelation unfold in the graceful and the lovely way that it will be unfolding in your horoscope. If you're born under Scorpio, or you have Scorpio rising, Uranus entering the zodiac sign of Gemini is going to feel a bit awkward, sort of ill-fitting for you. It doesn't click with the rest of your chart in an easy or understandable way. And that's because Gemini is a zodiac sign that forms a quincunx to Scorpio. The quincunx is what I often refer to as the postmodern aspect in astrology, because it's about the relationship of non-relationship. The two signs don't get one another on a basic level. Quincunxes are kind of like what happens in that book, Go Dog Go. I don't know if you had that when you were a kid. It's all about dogs in motion, but there's an ongoing motif where a poodle's wearing a fancy hat. She looks very dressed up and she keeps encountering this hound dog. And she says to the hound dog, hello. And the hound dog says, hello. And she says, do you like my hat? And the hound dog says, no, I do not like your hat. And she's like, goodbye. And he's like, goodbye. And they keep coming up against each other like 3 or 4 times during the book. That's kind of how a quincunx operates. The two signs are trying to greet and get to know one another, but they're not connecting. They don't want anything to do with one another, but they feel bad about that. So they come back and they try to reconnect again, only to find that they're not clicking. Now, this sounds like it would be a recipe for disaster. Like it would be like, oh, wow, that doesn't sound fun. But quincunxes, I have found, show up in the charts of people who are very creative or very athletic, or maybe even have a scientific bent. And you might wonder, well, why would it show up in their particular charts? And the reason why it shows up in their charts is that it's the nature of a quincunx relationship to be a wrinkle, which I also like to describe as a work in progress. In other words, the signs are trying to understand one another. They're not understanding one another, and they try to understand one another. But that doesn't prevent them from producing. That doesn't prevent them from creating. An artist, for instance, may have a hit song, and they may feel really great about that. And then they might immediately feel like, oh my God, where am I going to get another hit song? They feel under all this pressure. They go from song to song where, sometimes it's a hit, but it's an ongoing thing. That doesn't stop them from creating. The fact that they're frustrated in that way, that they never reach the ultimate result, is what keeps them creative. That's the same thing that an athlete experiences in a race or a game, that the game you played last night isn't going to be the same game that you play tonight. Or a scientist with a scientific theory where they're continually working on that theory and discovering, where they never arrive at one result that becomes the answer to everything in the universe, but that they may arrive at something, but then they're going to go and work on a new project or a new problem, and they're going to go through that whole process again. So quincunxes can actually be very energetic, they can be very dynamic, and they can be very powerful. I think a good way to think of Uranus traveling through the zodiac sign of Gemini for the next 7 years is as dealing with a child who's always asking why. Like if you say to a child, don't go near that. Why? Because the oven's on. Why? Because I'm cooking dinner. Why? Because you need something to eat tonight. Why? That sort of like constant why that's being asked. It's not really a challenge, although it kind of sounds like one, but it's a query, but not really a query, because the child isn't really interested in the answer. They're interested in just repeating the word why. What's going on here is that Uranus is moving through a very delicate corner of your chart. It's a part of your chart that's very much associated with your beliefs, your responses, but they're your emotional beliefs. They're your emotional responses to a situation. Actually, maybe a really good way to describe it, because I'm talking about the solar eighth house here, is a closet. A closet where you keep your clothes, but you also keep things that you haven't looked at forever, that you haven't looked at in ages, that have kind of taken up space and collected places in your psychic closet. And so with Uranus going through Gemini in this particular angle of your chart, there's going to be this feeling that things are being debunked in your life. They might be things you told yourself. They might be guilt trips that you've suffered from in silence. They might be grudges that you've held. They may be attitudes around relationships, particularly your relationship to money, that have been really held firm, that you never really felt that you could revisit or review. Uranus is known for knocking over things on their pedestals, for tipping sacred cows. And you may feel uneasy at the idea of so many sacred cows, so many things you told yourself, so many things you believed, so many experiences that you interpreted in this one way, experiences that might have been directed towards you resisting or fighting for the things that you want, or you wanting the things that you want. Uranus is going to be debunking all of those things. They're going to lose what their validity was before. And part of you might be like, oh no, that's, don't touch my things, don't touch my psychic closet, sort of thing. But what you're also going to find is that it sort of liberates you. It's going to change your attitudes about money. It's going to change your attitudes about yourself, about love, about grudges, about old scores. And it's not going to do it gently, all right? It's not going to be like, it's time to leave behind that, grudge that you've been carrying for 10 years. It's not going to do it like that. It's going to be all of a sudden like something has been knocked over like a favorite jar and it's smashed on the floor, where it's been debunked and you have to deal with it. So your first reaction may be shock and trauma, okay, because these are things that really matter to you. But what follows that first reaction may be almost a sense of liberation, or that the rules are changing, or I can approach love or relationship or my attitudes about money in a different way because they don't work in the way that they used to anymore. And so that's what you're going to be struggling with. At first, it may be like, I want nothing to do with this, but you're going to find that you have no choice. You have to deal with the smashed jar or the debunked myth or belief. But instead of feeling distraught, you may start to feel like you're regaining your power, like you're feeling empowered, like all of a sudden you have these choices or these options that you never had before. What's nice about Uranus spending 7 years in a sign is that you have 7 years to get used to that idea. You have 7 years to work with that idea. It's not going to wipe everything away. This isn't cataclysmic or catastrophic, but it will affect you and impact you in areas that you're going to have very powerful reactions to. And if you can stay with that reaction and see where that reaction leads, you may find that you've discovered a light at the end of the tunnel and that it's leading you into a new way of living that you never really considered before. If you're born under Sagittarius or you have Sagittarius rising, Uranus entering the zodiac sign of Gemini on July 7th is going to be very jolting. Now, the reason for this is that Uranus is most powerful when it enters a zodiac sign, and it doesn't reach that power again until it leaves a zodiac sign. So Uranus is entering Gemini. Gemini is your opposite sign in astrology, and Gemini in your solar horoscope also rules over the area of relationships. Now, you might be like, relationships? Again? I just had Jupiter going through my angle of relationships. And yes, that's true. You did have Jupiter going through your angle of relationships, which was very strong for you because Jupiter also happens to be your ruling planet. And so Jupiter going over your angle of relationships would have really tested your belief and your conviction in the power of a relationship for you. You might have broken up with someone, or you might have experienced a whole new person coming into your life, or you may have experienced relationships as an adventure. Your experience of relationships in the last year, they have been very opening up your world. The nature of Jupiter in the angle of relationships is to broaden your horizons and to open your world and to get you to think of relationships in a more fulfilling way. If you were involved in a relationship that wasn't working for you, then you wanted to find one that would be more fulfilling, or maybe you felt like you were being tied into relationships and you wanted to be free for a period of time. So Jupiter has really sort of opened up a different way of looking at yourself in relationships. These aren't just exclusive to romantic relationships, by the way. They can be business relationships or they can be collaborative relationships. But now you have Uranus entering this angle. So what does that mean? Well, Uranus is the planet of revolution and change. And when it first enters a zodiac sign, it knocks over the game board and it sends all the pieces flying. So all the things that made sense yesterday don't make any sense after the day that Uranus has entered that zodiac sign. The Wheel of Fortune in the Middle Ages talked about the capriciousness of life, the chance element of life, that you couldn't rely on life itself, that you could be up one day, down the next, just as well as you could be down one day and up the next following that. So life had its ups and downs, its ins and outs. That's what Uranus can do. It's like losing an internal gyroscope where you can't tell the difference between north and south and east and west. At times, Uranus first coming into a sign can make you feel like you're operating without an internal gyroscope. This is something that people born under Taurus or who have Taurus risings have experienced for the past 7 years. And if you know someone born under Taurus or has Taurus rising, you might want to ask them for some advice on how that works. But where people born under Taurus, for instance, or the fixed signs which Uranus impacted, might have felt a bit distraught with that passage of the planet through Taurus, Uranus has a different flavor when it's in a zodiac sign like Gemini. It's more mutable, it's more adaptable, and you being a Sagittarius, you might even find these ideas really exciting, where things might have felt like they were in a rut or stuck, or you had a choice between this or that. Uranus coming into the Gemini is saying, let's get rid of all the choices. Nothing is preset, nothing is predestined, everything is up in the air. Let's throw all the puzzle pieces back into the box, give it a good shake, and start that puzzle again. So this may be the feeling that you have with Uranus entering your opposite sign, that all of a sudden there's no rules, that a relationship or associations with people could go any which way. What you'll also have a feeling of during this period of time is that people sort of spinning into your life like tornadoes, and they might even have a sort of cyclonic energy to them where they spin into your life and they bring the craziness and they spin back out again. And you might find yourself really excited about that, really like, wow, that was a great roller coaster ride that I went on. When do I get to go on it again? So this could be a very enlivening period for you, a very energizing period for you as you deal with this wonderful range of different, innovative, and exciting personalities coming into your life. Now, is there a sense of consistency or permanence? There is. Given time, Uranus will be here for 7 years. There will be more of a sense of continuity and things like that. But for now, my best advice would be to sort of enjoy the adventure, to enjoy the open-endedness of things. What it can also represent, let's say you're in a relationship or an association, and this is a relationship and an association that has legs. It's something you truly want to preserve and keep on going. Then Uranus could represent a lot of crazy things going on in your partner's life, okay? That your partner might be experiencing ups and downs, or your partner, in terms of your partner's family or your partner's loved ones, are experiencing a lot of things being turned upside down or a lot of craziness. And so that type of energy is showing up in your life, not at you specifically, but through your partnerships, your collaborations, or your associations. So that's also a way that I've seen Uranus going through the seventh house operate. It may also draw you to associations where there's always that kind of exciting, thrilling, volatile type of energy. And then after you experience it, you go home and have a nice sleep or a restful period of time, and then you go back to it next day. It might be an occupation or a project or even a job that you have. So you're going to be having this feeling that the world is throwing a lot of spitballs in your direction, and you have to sort of try to hit the ball, or deal with all of these things that are being hurled in your direction. At first, you may feel overwhelmed and like it's too much and like it's a barrage of all of these sorts of things. But once you get used to the idea, you might find yourself very engaged, and you may find yourself really experimenting with different approaches or reactions, because there's so many different things going on in the lives around you that it's impacting you in such a way to be more experimental or to be more innovative or to be more spontaneous. So even at first, it may look like, that cyclone is heading towards you and your house. Remember the story of Dorothy Gale. There are also cyclones that pick up the house and move it to a wonderful place like Oz. And that could also be definitely on the agenda with Uranus entering the zodiac sign of Gemini on July 7th. If you're born into Capricorn, or you have Capricorn rising, Uranus in Gemini is going to be a little bit awkward for you. And that's because Gemini forms an astrological aspect to your sign, which is called a quincunx. A quincunx describes what I sort of refer to as a wrinkle in an astrological chart. It's 150 degrees away, and it takes place between a planet that trines and a planet that opposes. That doesn't mean it's bad. It just means that it's a hard energy for you to understand. And I think the best way to sort of describe that energy between Gemini and Capricorn to you is that Gemini is a more youthful type of energy and Capricorn is a more older or mature type of energy. So the two signs can sort of have a parent-child or adult-child relationship to one another. As a Capricorn, you take responsibilities under your shoulders and you treat obligations very seriously. And it's very important for you to know what you're doing, not because you need to be Mr. or Ms. Know-it-all, but it's important for you to be accomplished and for you to have achieved things and for you to be an authority in what it is that you do. This is something that you take very seriously. Gemini likes to experiment with options and alternatives and different ways of approaching something and different ways of doing something. And as a Capricorn, that can get under your skin. It's like, no, we have this one way of doing it, and we're going to stick with that. It's always been successful, and we're going to keep going like this. This is the way that things are done. And Gemini might be like, well, all formulas of success can become formulaic after a while. Let's shake things up and do things differently. And the Capricorn is like, if it's not broke, don't fix it. And the Gemini is like, I'm not fixing it, I'm playing with it, and why are you so stodgy? And why can't you be more inventive and spontaneous? So this is kind of the conversation that's going to be going on with you for the next 7 years. Now, it doesn't mean that it's the same conversation for 7 years and that's it. Uranus, which is the planet of revolution and change, it's into being innovative and experimental and trying different things in different ways. It's traveling through Gemini, which is a sign that's all about that. And so as a Capricorn, you're going to be forced to deal with that energy, but you're not going to be able to integrate it into your life. It's something that's always going on. Maybe it's a challenge. Maybe you're being questioned. Maybe it's the way that developments are working out. And so you're being thwarted by your habitual way of doing things, not being able to do the things that you used to do in a habitual way to get the results that you're used to getting. And so there's frustrating because you're trying to force a fit or you're trying to make things stay the same, and they're not going to stay the same, not with Uranus traveling through Gemini. So I think that what probably is going to help you out here is respect the new developments and experiences that are coming into your life. Don't shut them out. Don't say you have an answer when you don't have the answer. Be open to what these new experiences and developments are bringing into your life, and sort of adopt a more Gemini mindset would be very helpful, which is learning as you go. All right. So in other words, if there's a traditional way you have of doing things, or you've always done it like this, kind of not get rid of it, but put it to one side and adopt this mindset that you're learning as you go, that you don't really know what the next step is. You really don't know what comes next. This is going to leave you more open-minded and open-hearted to what shows up in your life. Maybe you have to brush up on old skills. Maybe you have to learn a new skill set altogether. Maybe you have to apply your talents and abilities in a new way, or you find yourself in a whole new context, maybe even lifestyle, maybe even vocation. But if you treat this as, I'm learning as I go, I'm not sure about what comes next, let's just see what happens and play with it. I think that's really where I want to go with you, is the idea of playing with something. Gemini is a zodiac sign that's very much associated to play. It's very much involved in early education for children, where children learn to play and get along with one another and act in a group. And sometimes that brings out the best in children, and sometimes it doesn't. But it's this idea of breaking the ice and getting to know people that you don't really know, and doing it in a playful manner. And I think that if you can adopt that mindset as all these new things are being thrown at you by Uranus going through the zodiac sign of Gemini, I think you're going to find yourself re-experiencing creativity in a way that you haven't experienced for a while, of reconnecting to an ingenuity in a way that you haven't connected to it in a while. And this will produce some wonderful results that may be beyond what you would have originally envisioned for yourself. But in the end, Uranus and Gemini will certainly prove that you really can teach an old dog new tricks. If you're born into Aquarius, or you have Aquarius rising, this period of time that Uranus is traveling through the zodiac sign of Gemini is going to be a wonderful period for you. The first one is that Uranus is in an air sign, Gemini. Gemini is an air sign just like your sign. Aquarius is an air sign. And so what that describes is a trine. And air is very much associated to people. It's associated to relationships. It's associated to communication. Air signs believe that you don't do things on your own. You do things in a group. You do things by working with other people, whether it's coordinating schedules, working with their personalities, working with the fact that one person had one set of duties to do, another person had another set of duties to do. There's a third person with yet another set of duties to do. And so now you're going to bring all of those together to create a project, or to create a company, or to create a really fabulous summer picnic. Okay, so there's a kind of potluck quality to the air signs, where everyone brings something to be celebrated in a collective or a group way. So with Uranus in Gemini, Uranus takes on a more illuminating quality here. Uranus is the planet of revolution and change. And when it enters your own sign, it can turn things upside down and inside out. And it can have a sort of even shocking effect. And that's what Uranus can do when it's traveling through your sign. But when Uranus is forming a trine to your sign, okay, then you have proximity. You're able to gauge the effect of Uranus and what it's having in your life. So instead of sort of flipping on a light switch and maybe there's like a little shock or something like that, and you're like, ow, when you're dealing with Uranian energy in a trine, it's like an electrical conduit. There's a flow of energy. It supports. It's turning on the light switch and suddenly the room is bathed in a lovely and a beautiful light. And this is what Uranus is going to be doing for you. The other way that Uranus is very powerful to you, because not only do we have it in a sign that trines you, and so it's creating a harmonious and a supportive energy, Uranus also happens to be your modern ruling planet. Aquarius is one of the few zodiac signs, and there are three, Scorpio, Aquarius, and Pisces, that have two ruling planets involved. Two ruling planets that rule over your zodiac sign. And for you, your two ruling planets are Saturn, the traditional ruler of Aquarius, and Uranus, the modern ruler of Aquarius. And the two of them both rule you. You have to sort of answer to both parents, as it were. So Uranus is going to represent your interests in the sky as much as, per se, Saturn is going to represent your interests in the sky. A ruling planet, or the way that I work with a ruling planet, is the planet that rules your zodiac sign. It acts as your patron saint, your den mother, your corporate sponsor, and your life coach, all wrapped into one. And so where Uranus, being the planet of revolution and change, could have, thrown all these disruptive developments at you, where you were being thrown one wild curveball after another, which might have sort of been the story of your life for the last 7 years, that Uranus was in the zodiac sign of Taurus, which is an earth sign, Taurus, which is a fixed sign, and Taurus, which is 90 degrees away from you, so it squares, where you were having a conflict with Uranus going through Taurus, which was perhaps upsetting or disrupting the way that you were trying to live your life, either in terms of health or wealth. These are the two ideas that are connected to the earth signs, and you kept hitting these disruptions or these conflicts at least twice a year, probably in the spring and in the autumn. Now Uranus has moved into Gemini, which is an air sign, and it's a more supportive energy. It's a trining energy. And Uranus, rather than being revolutionary and upsetting best laid plans, is now going to be trining you, and it now shows you that as its role of den mother and patron saint and corporate sponsor and life coach, it's really in a place where it can help you to move forward. It can help you to advance in the ways that you really do want to advance. Jupiter is a planet that we associate with higher purpose. When Jupiter is transiting a sign, we're like, oh, we will see our higher purpose either revealed or thwarted. But Jupiter is a planet that really lifts our sights to our higher purpose. Why are we here? And what is the purpose of my life? These are Jupiterian concerns. Uranus is playing on a wider playing field here. Both, interestingly enough, are sky gods. Jupiter, being the ruler of Mount Olympus in Greek mythology, ruled over the sky, and that's the sky that you would see in the day, like a blue sky, a clear sky, a stormy sky, a gray day, that sky. Uranus ruled over the heavens, meaning the sky full of stars at night. And so there was a sort of majesty and a remoteness to Uranus. But where Jupiter is higher purpose, Uranus is higher plan. Okay, it's this idea that there really is an intelligence at work in the universe, and that I have a part to play, and that there's a higher plan that's unfolding in my life. I don't know what it is. I didn't invent it. I didn't create it, but I have this sense that there's a higher plan. And as I'm being shown the different landmarks on this map that I'm using to travel through my life, things may make sense. I figure out a way to get from here to there, and I'm seeing that actually everything's happening for a reason. There's a sense of planned or structure to my life as I'm living it. So where Uranus can be the planet of revolution and change, it knocks over things that are held sacred. It kicks over the game board and sends all the pieces flying. The reason Uranus is doing this is in order to get it right. It's in order to get you in alignment with what your higher plan is in life, or rather the higher plan that life has for you and you trying to key into it or catch up or figure out what that work. With this trine energy that will be ruling your life for the next 7 years, you're going to be making sense of a lot of things. Things are going to come together in ways that you're like, oh, that's what that was about. I get that. And then it will be followed by, I know how to use that. I know how to apply that in my experience or to my next step. And by bringing up that idea, I'm invoking the idea of Gemini. Gemini is ruled by Mercury, the planet of the mind. It's a sign which is very much about learning, gathering information and learning and figuring out how to get from here to there. So with the Uranus and Gemini, it's going to sort of be, you'll have this sense that your grand plan in life is making sense to you, but you're also going to have a sense of how to make use of it, of how to access it, of how to get from one step to another, one place to another. And that's what makes Gemini Gemini. Gemini isn't concerned with the great, grand, sweeping scope of life. Gemini just wants to know, how do I get from here to there? What stepping stones do I take? What path do I follow? And so Gemini is going to sort of give you access to do this in your day-to-day life. You may not be caught up with some of those larger than life decisions and predicaments that Aquarius can find themselves facing, but it's going to be more like, oh, I know what to do. I can do this to get to there, to get to there, to get to there. And you're going to see it. Now, is it going to remain there permanently in your mind? No. Uranus is the planet of revelations and epiphanies. It marks those moments where the clouds part and you can see it, and you better jot it down really quickly because the clouds come back together again and you're like, what? Like, was I looking at? But what's nice about this is that you'll have a continual sense that there's a flight plan, really, in your life. There's a flight plan that's leading you to the places where you need to go. But as it leads you to the places where you need to go, these are going to be places outside of what you originally envisioned for yourself, outside of what's familiar, outside of maybe what you even planned for. We must never forget that there's always an unpredictable quality to Uranus. It doesn't come from, it delights in pulling the rug out from under you. Uranus is unpredictable really comes from the idea of inconceivable. I never thought of it that way, or I never saw myself doing it like that this way, or I never saw myself going off in this direction. So that's where Uranus it can be very much about going in directions and following paths that you never really dreamed of following before. But because it's in Gemini, and because it's your ruling planet, and it's in a sign that trines your sign, you won't experience this as being contradictory to who you are. You won't experience it as being foreign or alien. You may experience of like, oh, okay, that's not the way I thought of it before. But then you'll immediately experience, following that moment, delight, maybe even the squeals of delight of seeing how something can work out in ways that you had never conceived or imagined before. If you're born under Pisces or you have Pisces rising, your experience of Uranus is going to be a little bit like someone pulled the rug out from under you without you looking. Okay, it reminds me of one of those cartoons where they pull the rug out and the character does a somersault in midair and lands thump on the ground. That's going to be the feeling that you're going to be experiencing. Part of the reason for this departure from the way that you've been experiencing Uranus for the past 7 years is that for the past 7 years, Uranus has been traveling through the zodiac sign of Taurus, where it's been forming a sextile to your sign. Sextiles are conversational aspects that exist between two signs that are of the same gender. So it's this idea that a sign that shares your gender, basically, which would be an earth sign, but it's not a water sign, that would be a sign that you sextile with, that you have conversation with. And the relationship is very complementary and it's very encouraging. When you put water and earth together, for instance, the image I like to use is a plant. You plant a plant in earth and you water it, and the more that it's watered and nurtured, the more that that plant grows and flourishes. So that's been basically the sextile energy between Uranus and Taurus and your zodiac sign Pisces. So the Uranus and Taurus has actually been helping you along, showing you what you can do in ways that you never thought of doing before, and making you feel more confident in who you are and more relaxed and comfortable in who you are. Things have flourished during this period of time, even if you did have Saturn and Pisces from 2023 until just recently. Uranus moves into Gemini, and it moves into that part of your chart that squares your zodiac sign. So that relationship changes. Instead of Uranus as being a revelatory energy and an enlightening energy and a constructive energy, now Uranus is going to be squaring your zodiac sign. So that is a challenging energy that's going to be going on between those two signs. Now, that doesn't mean that you're going to get into fights with people left, right, front, and center, that no one can take you to a brawl without you saying, who wants a piece of this? And, picking a fight with someone. That's not what's going to go on. What's going to go on is that two views of yourself are now going to be in conflict with one another. As a Pisces, for instance, you might have seen yourself as a very loving, supportive person, very sensitive, very caring, and, sort of going along with the flow and things like that. But now that Uranus has moved into Gemini, it's getting you to see that you aren't going to be going with the flow like you went with the flow before, that you're going to have Gemini elements appearing in your life, things where you question what's going on, where if you don't like what's going on, you're going to say something about it. You're not going to suffer in silence. You might go from being a more passive or non-committal type of person to be more affirmative because of the yang energy of the Gemini, where you speak your mind, you say your piece, and you want to stand for that. Now, that's obviously going to surprise people in your life who may be used to you being more accommodating. And so they might be like, hey, what's gotten into you? And why don't you go back to being the way you were before, which was kind and sensitive and agreeing with everything I had to say, And you may find yourself disagreeing what people have to say. You may find yourself with loved ones and friends where in the past you used to say, oh, that's all right. You were upset. I get it. You might find yourself saying, you know what? It's not all right. I understand that you got upset, but what about my getting upset at you being upset? All right. There's a two-way street here. This isn't just about me supporting you. Gemini by its nature is conversational. It's not going to stand up for what it wants in a sort of Aries way, like, again, fighting or combating or getting into arguments. The argument is kind of going to be more debate conversational. It's not going to be argument like yelling at someone. It's going to be like, you know what? What you said just hurt me, and I'm not all right with that. And the person might be like, well, get over it. I don't feel like getting over it. I feel like telling you that maybe you should change the way that you just spoke to me because I didn't like it and you hurt my feelings. Oh, I hurt your feelings? Yes, I have feelings and they got hurt. All right. And I don't like that. And I don't think that that's all right. So that's more along the lines of the arguing or the challenging, but in a Gemini way. Okay. Gemini is a zodiac sign that's associated to relationship. It's an air sign. Relationships and talking things through are really important to Gemini. As a water sign, you're more on the feelings than you are in the relationship. Okay, water is all about emotions, feelings, and love. And air signs are all about relationship in terms of like How do people get along? How do they coordinate? How do they understand one another? Air signs tend to be much more verbal and to communicate. They need to talk through their feelings, whereas water signs like Pisces need to feel their feelings. And oftentimes, if they're upset, they just really want to be left alone, and they'll reemerge when they've made peace with themselves. During this period of time that Uranus is in Gemini, it's going to be agitating you to speak up. But it can't just be like, I'm angry and I'm not going to take it anymore. It's not Mars, okay? It's Uranus and it's Gemini. It's speak up, but Uranus in Gemini is going to work on your communications skills. You speak up, but that means you also have to listen to what that person's saying, and then you have to respond to what that person's saying. Gemini is a zodiac sign that's very much involved in play. All right. It's a zodiac sign that's involved in early education of children, where children learn that, you have to do things like put your things away, and you can't hit someone else in class and make them cry and scream, that's not all right. That's not okay. That when you lose, you're not like a sore loser and yell at the person. You say, okay, I lost that round. And if you win, you're not like, I won and you're a loser. You're like, I won and let's play again. This is Gemini's relationship to play. And it's a wonderful quality, especially for a zodiac sign like Pisces. So it's not really about just listing your grievances. That's not what Uranus and Gemini is going to be about. It's not just listing your grievances and these are the problems and I've sat on these feelings for decades. It's learning to interact with someone now, again, that's going to be different. Okay? It's not going to be hugely different because it's Gemini. It will be radically different because it's Uranus, but it's not going to be hugely different because Gemini is a mutable sign. It will work with whatever is put on its table or put in its lap. This speaks to the improvisational and inventive qualities of Gemini. And again, that sense of play. So if you can kind of lend yourself getting into this mode of like, it's not about who's right or wrong. It's about how you want to communicate and relate to someone, maybe with something volatile like hurt feelings, in which you say, you know what, that used to be okay and it's not okay anymore. I want to start changing that in our discourse. That might mean a few pain silences or temper tantrums or something along those lines. But if you commit to a discourse, you're going to be introducing into your relationships conversation. Things aren't going to be assumed. Things aren't going to be presumed, but they don't have to become antagonistic or difficult either. I know that I use the word square, and square can be combative, but there's different ways of being combative. You can be combative in and out screaming someone else, or you can be combative like in a fencing match, which is very graceful and done with elan. That can be combative as well. And that's kind of where I'm encouraging you to go. You're going to want to do more than stick up for your feelings. You're going to want to talk about your feelings, which as a Pisces is a tall order. That's a huge challenge. You like to feel your feelings, not necessarily talk. But as we get into this new idea of Uranus and Gemini, and you talking out your feelings with someone else, and you listening, because that also is important with Gemini. Gemini speaks and it also listens. And as you listen to what someone else is saying, and even if you totally disagree with it, you find a way to see how they would think that way, which again is very Gemini. This is going to introduce you to a very exciting period of time in your life where you're changing the nature of your relationships, but not in a my way or the highway sort of way, or a sort of histrionics or ultimatum sort of way, or a repressed feeling sort of way. You change the nature of your relationships because you're learning to play with one another in a different way. And this is going to reintroduce a lot of joy and a lot of fun, along with a lot of love and a lot of curiosity and wonder about the people in your life. If you work with this Uranian energy constructively, and you have 7 years to get the handle of it, you're going to find your relationships much more fulfilling and enjoyable than you ever have before. If you enjoyed what you saw, please press the like button. It helps more than you know. If you could subscribe, that would be wonderful. I've had such a wonderful time visiting with you this week, and I can't wait to get together next time on Christopher Renstrom Astrology.